Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Pakistan says the United States has messed up in Afghanistan by looking for a military solution. In an interview, Prime Minister Imran Khan said the only good outcome is that if there is an inclusive political settlement. Khan said Islamabad has helped by getting the Taliban to talks, but it cannot afford to host any US bases. Meanwhile, the US says negotiations are the only path to peace in Afghanistan and all the parties must take them seriously. During his visit to India, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said violence by the Taliban is deeply troubling and not a good sign for the country's future. Meanwhile, in a meeting with the Taliban delegation, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said the group can play an important role in ending Afghanistan's war. Iran's supreme leader says that Iran will not accept Washington's stubborn demands in talks to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said the US has failed to guarantee that it will never abandon the pact again. Since April, Tehran and the six world powers have been in talks to revive the deal abandoned by the then US President Donald Trump 3 years ago. Brazil's COVID-19 death toll has spiked again with over 1,300 deaths reported overnight. The Latin American state also registered more than 41,000 new infections in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, Pakistan has logged over 4,000 new cases, its highest daily toll in over 2 months, and 44 new deaths. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 4.1 million lives and infected over 195 million people. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan says the United States has messed up in Afghanistan by looking for a military solution. In an interview, Prime Minister Imran Khan said the only good outcome is an inclusive political settlement. Khan said the worst situation in Afghanistan would be if there is a civil war. He said Pakistan will then have to deal with a refugee influx and will be drawn into the conflict. Khan said Islamabad has helped by getting the Taliban to talks, but it cannot afford to host any US bases. He said Pakistan wants to be a partner with the US in peace, but not in conflict. Meanwhile, the US says negotiations are the only path to peace in Afghanistan and all the parties must take them seriously. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said this during his meeting with India's regional leaders in New Delhi. Security situation in Afghanistan is deteriorating since May, when the Taliban renewed their attacks on government forces amid the withdrawal of foreign troops. Secretary of State Antony Blinken termed the spike in violence deeply troubling. Blinken said the violence by the Taliban against the Afghan people is not a good sign for the country's future. Meanwhile, China says it expects the Taliban can play an important role in ending Afghanistan's war and rebuilding the country. A 9-member Taliban delegation led by Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar met Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Tianjin. A Taliban spokesperson says the two sides discussed political, economic and security issues. In a tweet, Mohammad Naeem said they assured Beijing that Afghan soil won't be used against any country. He said China reiterated its commitment to continue assistance for Afghanistan and its people. The spokesperson noted Beijing also pledged not to interfere in the country's internal matters. On the other hand, Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu said Moscow is ready to provide Tajikistan with any assistance needed amid the Afghan crisis. Shoigu added Russia, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan will also hold a series of drills in the wake of emerging threats. Meanwhile, Turkey has ratcheted up security measures in the eastern province of Van amid concerns over a potential new influx of migrants into the country from Afghanistan via Iran. And to talk more about this, we have with us Lieutenant General retired Ghulam Mustafa. General Mustafa, thank you very much for your time at Indus News. Firstly, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the US has messed up in Afghanistan by looking for a military solution. So what's your take on this?
I think that was clear right from day one when the United States entered Afghanistan. Their decision was taken in anger. It wasn't very well balanced or very well thought out decision at that time. And ever since, it has been compounding its blunders. And over the last 10, 15 years, it was more than evident that US is not going anywhere with the kind of strategy that it had adopted, trying to burden the Afghans into submission. They are the kind of people who could do that. They could do that. So I think Prime Minister is absolutely on the dot, and he said that US has blundered more than once. It had the opportunity when it was slightly on the ascendancy, could have started negotiations then. And when it finally did, that was again not very well thought out, the whole thing, because while they were talking to the Taliban, and they had given them the recognition that the Taliban were looking for, and meeting them in Doha without their so-called puppet regime in Kabul. And there was nobody from Kabul on the table at that time. So I think Prime Minister is on the dot more than once.
General Mustafa, Prime Minister Imran Khan also says Pakistan will have to deal with a refugee influx if there is a civil war in the neighboring country, as Pakistan has already been hosting millions of Afghan refugees. What difficulties Pakistan can face if the situation worsens over there?
I think Pakistan has faced this kind of a situation over the last 3 decades or so, ever since Soviets incursion into Afghanistan. And I remember being at the border at that time. It's a terrible mess that Pakistan had to face. Over, I think, 5 million of them in Pakistan, suddenly no space for them. Pakistan had to create the infrastructure to house and host them. And the kind of economic cost, the social cost that Pakistan is paying. And the socio-economic system is Pakistan, the whole basics, I think, have been disturbed and imbalanced in KP and elsewhere in Pakistan. And if it happens yet again, there'll be a lot of bloodshed. And as a result, if we have some more refugees, you don't know what kind of people you're getting now. Already, I think last night when the Prime Minister was talking to that CNN, that interviewer, he said that Pakistan is being blamed for supporting Taliban. Why the hell people don't understand that Pakistan just can't afford to do that? Because Pakistan is the only country in the world which is as affected, if not more, by what happens in Afghanistan. We have suffered over 700,000 people dead, so over 70,000 people dead, and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars lost. Who's going to make that up? So therefore, Pakistan, I think, has very serious reservations on the whole thing that the Americans trying to work out in Afghanistan. Also, the implications of and the fallout of what happens in Afghanistan if there is no peace settlement as soon as possible, and all the stakeholders aren't on the table at that time. That, I think, is in Afghanistan's interest and Pakistan's interest. You know, the Prime Minister, I think, in the last interview, he said that the country which is most affected, and I think most of us and all of us, I think, have been voicing this kind of concern, that things going wrong in Afghanistan directly affect Pakistan.
General Mustafa, let's now talk about the statement of the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who says violence by the Taliban against the Afghan people is deeply troubling. The U.S. has already escalated its air raids against the Taliban. What strategy do you think the U.S. can adopt to stop the Taliban's advances?
I think the best thing the U.S. can do is bring in some dollars, let some good people handle things there and get out of Afghanistan with all that forces and all that kind of a bombing that has been done. It has done that for the last 20 years. But look what they got. They had to leave Afghanistan in a hurry. And more of it is going to spoil things further. They are hurting Afghans regardless of who they are, Taliban or otherwise. They are hurting the whole thing more than Taliban are doing. And if they let the Afghans sit down somewhere and they stop supporting one against the other, I think Taliban and the stakeholders have suffered enough now to understand that peace is the only way out, and the way for the peace is to sit down on the table. Americans have actually no strategy. They're lost for it. They only know one thing, that they have to keep this region unstable for as long as possible, so that this region in general, the rest of the world, because of the connectivity which is coming up, should not develop. That is what the Americans want, and that is what they know. And they can kill hundreds and thousands of people to what they want. And they have done that not only in Pakistan, they have done that in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, the world over.
General Mustafa, last but not the least, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi says the Taliban can play an important role in ending Afghanistan's war. So does this statement mean that China backs the Taliban in any sort of future government in Afghanistan?
In a way, yes. Because Chinese understand that at this point in time, if there's one party in Afghanistan which has been given recognition by the United States of America and the rest of the world had to recognize that, are Taliban. They're the ones who are most organized on ground at that point. They're the ones who are doing something, at least, whether we like it or not. They are going about it in the method that they know the best. They're talking to the people, they're trying to convince them, and they have come up with now what they call a non-inclusive system, which has to be worked out by the Afghans themselves. And the Chinese advisor, I think they are doing the right thing, and they are helping Taliban to understand that peace is the way forward, because Chinese are the best at this kind of thing. They can negotiate endlessly to get to a point that they want.
Lieutenant General retired Ghulam Mustafa, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. And now moving on, Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud has lauded Pakistan's role for regional peace. Prince Faisal called on Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff General Qamar Javed Bajwa in Rawalpindi. The Pakistani military's media wing said Prince Faisal assured Islamabad of unflinching Saudi support. It said both the leaders discussed the Afghan peace process and the evolving security situation as well. The army said that also discussed ways to collaborate for regional peace and connectivity. Meanwhile, General Bajwa said the Pakistan-Saudi ties are based on bonds of brotherhood and mutual trust. He said both the nations will continue to play their part for peace and stability. He also thanked the Saudi leadership for the support to Pakistan and its armed forces. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has arrived in Bahrain for a two-day official visit. He was received by his Bahraini counterpart, Dr. Abdul Latif bin Rashid Al Zaini, and Pakistan's envoy to Bahrain, Muhammad Ayub, at the airport. The Foreign Office says Qureshi is leading Pakistan's delegation at the second Pakistan-Bahrain Joint Ministerial Commission. It said both sides will hold expert-level talks on commerce, energy, overseas employment and tourism. Qureshi will also call on the Bahraini leadership to discuss ways to strengthen bilateral relations. Iran's supreme leader says Tehran will not accept Washington's stubborn demands in talks to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. The state media quoted Ayatollah Ali Khamenei as saying the U.S. has failed to guarantee that it will never abandon the pact again. He said the Americans once violated the deal without any cost by exiting it while acting cowardly and maliciously. Since April, Tehran and 6 world powers have been in talks to revive the nuclear deal abandoned by then U.S. President Donald Trump 3 years ago. The sixth round of indirect talks between Tehran and Washington was adjourned on June 20. Parties involved in the negotiations have yet to announce when the next round of negotiations will resume. The Arab coalition says it has destroyed several missiles and drones launched by the Yemen's Houthi rebels towards Saudi Arabia. The coalition said the rebels launched 4 ballistic missiles and 2 explosive-laden drones towards southern Jazan city. Riyadh said it is taking measures to target the sources of the threat per international law. This comes as U.S. envoy for Yemen, Tim Lenderking, arrived in Riyadh to discuss the Houthi offensive on Marib. The U.S. State Department says fighting in the province is exacerbating the humanitarian crisis and triggering instability. Lenderking is set to meet the UN, the Saudi, as well as Yemeni government officials. Moving on, in Tunisia, opponents of President Kais Saied say they are ready for early elections while warning against an autocratic regime. The country is plunged into political crisis after Saied sacked the prime minister and suspended the parliament.
The country's largest political bloc, Ennahda, has labeled the power grab a coup d'etat. Ennahda said it is ready for early legislative as well as a presidential election for the sake of the democratic path. The party also accused Said of working with undemocratic forces to overturn the constitutional rights of elected officials. Meanwhile, Tunisia's foreign minister phoned his counterparts in European Union, Turkey, and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to reassure them. Foreign Minister Othman Jarandi said that he told them that the president's extraordinary measure is temporary. He said his counterparts also pledged their continued support to the fledgling Tunisian democracy. Earlier, Saudi Arabia affirmed its confidence in Tunisia's leadership. The Saudi Foreign Ministry said Riyadh expects Tunisia's internal affairs and considers the situation a sovereign matter, while the Moroccan and Algerian foreign ministers also met Said in Tunis.
For more on this, we are joined by Abdunnoor Tomi, political analyst from Paris. Mr. Tomi, thank you for your time at Indus News. Firstly, opponents of Tunisian President Kais Saied say they are ready for early elections, but they warned at the same time against an autocratic regime. What solution do you see of Tunisia's political crisis?
Yeah, I mean, as you stated out, it's really now Tunisia entered a crisis, which is another layer to the socioeconomic and the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. Now, the president provoked this institutional crisis, which, has left all the analysts, to wonder, what's going to happen next and how he will process his this political move. So, we are in these days or these moments in kind of wait and see what's going to happen. But the latest developments are not that are really worrisome. And many people in Tunisia, whether political parties, elite, and even the people are really wondering what's going to happen to their peaceful revolution that has shaken the entire region 10 years ago. So now we are between two possibilities or two scenarios. So either the Egyptian scenario or the Turkish scenario, meaning by this, does Kais Saied and his entourage and the people who are behind him, it's very interesting because there are some regional powers who are supporting his move, so will continue and push to the Egyptian scenario, which means a coup, directed, explicit coup, or the people in Tunisia, the political parties, the elite, and the human rights activists who have been fighting for the freedom and liberty for decades. So they will face these the president's moves and stand to his decisions, like the Turks did in July 2016.
Mr. Tomi, now the country's largest political bloc, Ennahda, has accused President Said of working with undemocratic forces to overturn the constitutional rights of elected officials. What's your take on this?
Yes, they are right. Actually, whether now everybody is blaming Ennahda and putting the blame on the Ennahda, which is, to some extent, and to be fair to this political party, the Ennahda movement is doing anything to maintain the stability of the country and to let this learning democratic process to thrive. So therefore, the other side, who are like putting the blame on the Ennahda, who are the real obstructionists and rejectionists to any move that will help the Tunisians, political leaders, and notably the president and the House Speaker, Rashid Al-Ghannouchi, to break through to the crisis. Now, and there is this kind of frontal clash between the two leaders, and like the late president Baji Qaid Essebsi, who was very having this positive image and trying to help, working together with Ghannouchi to maintain the stability and help the democratic process again to thrive and break through the political impasse. So now the real question, because Qais Said, and we have to, not to forget this, he doesn't belong to any political party. He ran as an independent, but he had large victory or comfortable victory in the election with the help of the Ennahda. So Ennahda voted for him, or their voters voted for Qais Said en masse in the second round when he faced the Nabil Qarawi, the candidate of the Heart of Tunisia party. So the question now is, it's not really about the Ennahda. If we look carefully and we try to go deeper in this situation, the problem is with anything that come out of the box of the political establishment, either domestically or regionally.
So, Mr. Tomi, do you see international pressure on the Tunisian government as it has contacted with the world bodies and regional powers to assure them that the president's extraordinary measure is a temporary one?
You're right. That's a good question, because as we all know, the international community reacted timidly on this move, because besides, let's say, the US is making a kind of vague statement, okay, we will hope that the Tunisians will get their stuff together, and then we encourage the democratic process that started a decade ago. But it's still very, very timid. And so that regional powers like France, France, they didn't actually venture anything. In 2 days, they didn't say anything until yesterday. They started to send very, very soft messages, kind of rhetorical messages like, okay, so we will help the Tunisians to maintain their democratic process, and we look for the stability. But it is very interesting. When we speak here about France, is the usual suspect in the region, and also the other group, or the other part in the equation who is behind this. So we know there is the anti-revolutionary camp, or the anti-Arab Spring revolutionary in the Arab countries, who have been very active, and they have been doing anything to stop the democratic process and to let the democracy thrive in this region.
Mr. Abdul Tomi, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. And now moving on, Israeli forces have shot dead a Palestinian man in Baita village near the Nablus city of occupied West Bank. Palestinian media said the 41-year-old Shadi Umar Lutfi Salim was on his way home from work It said the Israeli army injured nearly 50 people in a clampdown on a protest that erupted after the incident. Earlier, in the northern Jordan Valley, at least 13 Palestinian protesters were injured by the Israeli forces. Meanwhile, the family of a Palestinian man who died in Israeli custody has alleged he was beaten to death. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Brazil's COVID-19 death toll has spiked again with over 1,300 deaths reported overnight. The Latin American country also registered more than 41,000 new infections in the past 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 4.1 million lives and infected over 195 million people. More in this report.
The latest surge of COVID-19 pandemic driven by the Delta variant continues to devastate countries with lower vaccination rates. The International Monetary Fund has warned that the global economy may lose $4.5 trillion if the trend continues. Australia's New South Wales state has extended a lockdown in Sydney for a month. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reversed course on masking guidelines. The agency advised even vaccinated people to return to wearing masks indoors in areas where the virus is surging.
The recommendations and the discussion that we were having months ago that the CDC was basing their recommendations on were dealing what was called the Alpha variant, which is considerably different than the Delta variant. The Delta variant has a very unusual capability of spreading much more easily than the Alpha did.
President Joe Biden also said that his administration is considering whether to require federal employees to be vaccinated against COVID-19. In the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Boris Johnson called for caution after new cases fell this week. However, the country registered more than 130 deaths, the highest toll since March. Ireland is the latest EU member state to commit to offering COVID-19 vaccines to children aged 12 to 15. It also opened its strongly subscribed program to 16 and 17-year-olds. Meanwhile, in Italy, hundreds of people gathered in Rome to protest against the Green Pass.
The Green Pass can be useful for abroad, but not for everyday life. Social life cannot be cancelled in a democratic country like ours. It is not possible that from August 6 it will no longer be possible to go to the cinema, theatre, museum, restaurant, bar, and to the gym.
Saudi Arabia says it will ban its citizens from traveling abroad for 3 years if they break COVID-19 travel rules. South Korea and Thailand have reported the highest ever increase in their daily cases.
Moving on, Pakistan has recorded the highest daily COVID-19 cases in more than 2 months as more than 4,000 people tested positive overnight. The country's health ministry says the infection count has crossed 1,015,000. The ministry also recorded 44 new deaths, pushing the toll over 23,100. It said more than 935,000 people have recovered, while nearly 2,900 are in critical condition. Meanwhile, more than 26.2 million vaccine doses have been administered so far across the country. Over 5.4 million people are fully vaccinated. Armenia says 3 of its soldiers have been killed in an exchange of gunfire with Azerbaijan. In a statement, the Armenian Defense Ministry said the 2 troops have also been injured in the same incident while the fighting continues. Meanwhile, Azerbaijan said Armenian troops have injured 2 of its soldiers. In a tweet, the Azeri Defense Ministry said its army positions in the Kalbajar district were once again subjected to fire. It said Armenia bears full responsibility for the escalation of tensions along the border. Azerbaijan has also reportedly accepted a Russian proposal to enforce a ceasefire in the area. The incident is one of the deadliest since a 6-week war between Yerevan and Baku over the Nagorno-Karabakh region last year. The U.S. has expressed deep concern about the reported attacks against Eritrean refugees in Ethiopia's Tigray region. In a press briefing, U.S. State Department spokesperson Jelena Porter called on Tigray rebels to halt attacks against Eritreans. She also called for an end to violence against asylum seekers trying to respond to the humanitarian disaster in the region. Earlier, UN refugee agencies said 2 Eritrean refugees have been killed this month. It also said that about 24,000 Eritrean refugees are trapped in 2 camps. Fighting broke out in Tigray last November and has escalated since in and around the refugee camps. Thousands of people have died in the fighting and around 2 million have been displaced. The death toll from a recent heavy rainfall in central China's Henan province has risen to 73. Authorities say more than 13 million people have been affected. Meanwhile, around 1.4 million have been relocated across the province. Officials said more than 784,000 houses were damaged during the rainstorms. The downpours have also caused an economic loss of around $13.6 billion. Moving on to India, where at least 18 migrant workers have died after a truck crashed into their bus in the northern state of Uttar Pradesh. Authorities say at least 30 people were also injured in the accident. Officials say some people were on the bus while others were sleeping next to the parked vehicle. Police told reporters that the bus was overloaded beyond its capacity. It had about 140 passengers, while its capacity was just for 65 people. At least 7 people have died after a cloudburst in the Chenab Valley of Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Local authorities say 17 persons have been rescued so far, with 28 others missing. Several structures, including homes, have been swept away by the flash floods. Disaster response forces have been deployed to the affected area to carry out search and rescue missions. However, bad weather is hampering the relief mission. The weather department has predicted heavy rainfall in Kashtwar district till July end. In Germany, at least 2 persons have died and 31 others are injured in a fire at an industrial park in the western city of Leverkusen. The explosion caused a fire at a fuel depot of the Chem Park industrial zone for several chemical companies. Police said 5 of the 31 injured people were affected seriously and need intensive care. Police said several people were missing following the blast. However, the Chem Park administration said the fire has been extinguished and search for the missing people is underway. President Joe Biden has warned that a significant cyber attack on the U.S. could lead to a real shooting war with a major power. However, he stressed the necessity to work with Russia and China despite a rivalry. Biden made the remarks during a visit to the office of the Director of the National Intelligence in Virginia. His comments highlighted what Washington sees as growing threats posed by Russia and China. In his speech, Biden said the ailing economy of Russia makes it even more dangerous. He accused Moscow of spreading disinformation about the 2022 U.S. midterm elections. The U.S. president also referred to Chinese President Xi Jinping as a deadly earnest and termed Beijing's rise as a serious challenge. The World Health Organization says the tobacco industry is attracting youngsters to e-cigarettes, which can lead to addiction. In a report, the WHO rebutted claims by some executives that they aim to solve the smoking epidemic. The body says more than 8 million people die annually from tobacco use and exposure to tobacco smoke. The report called for greater regulation of smoke-free devices containing nicotine. In a briefing, the WHO officials said they know e-cigarettes are also harmful, even though the evidence is not yet totally conclusive on the issue. Rodiger Crack said e-cigarette users were at least twice, if not 3 times more likely to become cigarette smokers. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Lows and the highs of the business world. Now Asian stock markets are mostly trading lower as stocks in Hong Kong struggle to bounce back from a two-day rout. The hardest hit Chinese tech stocks in Hong Kong traded mixed. The Hang Seng Index continued its downward trend, slipping fractionally. In mainland China, the Shanghai Composite and Shenzhen Component declined. Japan's Nikkei 225 has also dropped, while South Korea's Kospi lost as well. Meanwhile, down south, Australia's ASX 200 is also following the regional trend. The State Bank of Pakistan has decided to keep the policy rate at 7% for the next 2 months. In a press conference, Governor Dr. Roza Baqi said this is the 5th consecutive time that the bank has maintained it. Baqi said the results were in front of the nation in form of 3.94% economic growth. He said there has been a reduction in headline inflation and core inflation. But the central bank's governor said there is a need to reduce it further. He assured that in an emerging country like Pakistan, the current account deficit of 2 to 3% of the GDP was sustainable. And now for weather updates, we have Naila Shuja with us.
Thank you. We're going to start off with Abu Dhabi, where the weather is partially sunny with temperatures around 44 degrees Celsius. Then moving towards Amsterdam, the rain is keeping things chilly at 19 degrees Celsius. In Ankara, the sunny temperatures are rising to 33 degrees, while down under in Auckland, the winter weather is keeping things cloudy and chilly at 15 degrees Celsius. In Bangkok, there are severe chances of thunderstorms with temperatures around 33 degrees Celsius, while in Beijing, the temperature is around 29 degrees Celsius with some clouds. Beirut has some sunny weather with temperatures sliding to a solid 31 degrees Celsius, while the people in Berlin will have to deal with severe thunderstorms and temperatures at 24 degrees Celsius. Heading to Cairo, make sure you have some sunblock because temperatures are going to rise to around 39 degrees Celsius. If we head down under to Canberra, the winter rain is keeping things chilly with temperatures around 12 degrees Celsius. While in Islamabad, hang on to your umbrellas. The temperature has dropped to 29 degrees Celsius with rain, and more rain. Lastly, in Jakarta, there are some nice, pleasant, sunny weather with 32 degrees temperature. That's all for now. Back to you.
Thank you, Naila, for the weather updates. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.